Hi, I'm John Bogard and I'm an astrologer. Today we're going to go through some suicide. We're going to discuss suicide. I just want to keep in mind so you know, let me give you this number. There is a suicide hotline and it's 988. So if you know anybody who struggles with suicide, make sure you have that number around. All right, so what we'll do, we'll get underway. Thank you. Today we are looking at suicide and how it relates to astrology. This chart here is Robin Williams' transits on August 11th, 2014. This is when they found him. So even if we went and we moved this a day previous, I believe his wife seen him alive around 10:30 p.m. Oops, that was a mistake. There we go. That was a mistake. And we're on August 10th, 7:05 p.m. hours. So sometime after this, they found him the next day. So they found him on the 11th in the morning. So I think we could probably, 11:05 would be a relatively safe time. Take a look at it. I'll move it a little bit here and see if there's anything that... Okay. Since we don't know exactly what time he did it, I think we're in the ballpark with some things, though. It's a tragedy. Suicide's a tragedy. And we can use astrology to help us with it in a couple of different ways. One, when we know somebody is dealing with suicidal behavioral disorders, which is different than when you go through an experience in life where you have a loss and you're going to go through possibly suicidal thoughts. Most people in their lifetime will experience it. So one way for you to grasp what these people are going through, if you could recall, just for the benefit of understanding their pain, of what you were experiencing when you went through those. People who don't have it as a behavioral disorder, they're not going to be in a whole lot of trouble, because yours is more in passing. It's not going to be every day. When it's a behavioral disorder, then you have a lot more thought process more frequently in suicide thoughts. Over a period of time, these individuals will acquire methods and means to commit suicide. They will stockpile pills, buy guns. They'll do things so at some point, certain things all fall together and they find it considerably easy to go ahead and pull the trigger. His chart's really interesting. Let me go, I want to leave it on this for a minute. I don't know if I can do bi-wills here. Let me check this out. If I have that in here. Oh, it doesn't do them up here. Okay, that's all right. We can always go back to it. This is his natal chart. And up here at the top, you have Pluto and Mercury, and they're conjunct. Whenever you look into a natal chart and you see Pluto and Mercury make an aspect, they will have a very intense thought process. It'll have, if they have suicidal tendencies, suicidal behavioral disorder. That's what it says in the DSM-5, what this is. This is going to be a major player right here. Most of them, some people will give hints. They'll say that in some way, shape, or form, they may give a hint that they're suicidal. But frequently, you'll never know it. I watched a real CSI, not the made-for-TV stuff, but a real CSI, and that man, in that case, he was planning his suicide for 10 years. And then finally it all fell together. He had whatever it was that you get to that point where you finally do it. And it was fascinating what he went through. And he tried to make it look like a murder so his family could get all of the life insurance and things of that nature. So right here, Pluto has a lot to do with death in and of itself. Pluto in our chart is where we'll experience real deep emotional pain. It's agonizing. Frequently, astrologer says it's not death, it's transformation. Oh my God. Let's get real for a minute, all right? This is death. And yes, when you die, definitely there is a transformation that takes place, but you are no longer physically present. You're no longer in a physical body. So when an apple rots, goes away, it's gone. Okay, a maid turned into water and dust, but the fact of the matter is, it's still death. And that process, a good way for you to grasp what the feeling is if you've ever went through a breakup with a loved one, a divorce, you lost someone close to you, even losing material things can do it. You could lose a home, you could lose your entire retirement, you could, whatever it may be. You feel that excruciating pain. That is Pluto. That's a process. And in this case, it's conjunct his mind, Mercury, 22 degrees, 18 degrees. This is not the only Pluto-Mercury chart that I know of. I don't have the fellow's chart anymore, but I was asked by a fella. He said, hey, can we go ahead and do a quick reading? And I was on my way out to do a meeting, and and I said, I will be back in an hour and a half. I said, just meet me back here. And he didn't make it back. And 2 days later, he shot himself. And he had a Pluto squaring Mercury. And he was pretty young when that had happened. And there's a lot involved in that when that happens. He was a phenomenal athlete. He had a lot of things in his life, but right at that time, there was a lot of things happening in his family, a lot of loss. And so he was in a really bad state of mind. So I wish I still had his chart, because then I could pull up the transits on the day that he had died and see what influences were at play there. But what we're going to do is we're going to jump back in here, and I'm going to move. Well, let me see if there's anything else I want to cover about Robin Williams and that. His Mars also, this is interesting. Mars and Uranian energy here is squaring his Neptune. The guy was phenomenal comic. I mean, I watched himself all the way back from the beginning of his career. He was just hilarious. he did deal with alcoholism. That'll explain when we get into alcoholism and drug addiction. It's going to relate a lot to Neptune. Neptune relates to, and his is squaring Mars in Cancer. Oh, that's interesting. When we get into Mars and Cancer, and this Uranian Cancer, that'll be a. I'll have to remember this chart when we're doing that. But this here will frequently relate to drug addiction and alcoholism, hard aspects to Neptune, the 12th house, and Pisces. Things in Pisces. Oh, and look at here. His moon is in Pisces, and his north node is in Pisces in the 4th house. Oh, Venus conjuncts his south node up here. So he did have Pisces influences in there too. Scorpio ascendant. Keep in mind, Scorpio, Pluto, and the 8th house are all interconnected. So let's go ahead. So we know when this part of his chart lights up, his mind is going to be intense. Dark thoughts. Pluto will relate to dark thoughts in the mind. Right there. Also, another thing about Pluto, Scorpio in the 8th house, it has a lot of it's not uncommon for people of that nature to get into psychology. And it isn't that they all are experiencing the behavioral disorder of suicide. It's because the depth that you seek in Pluto, it has enormous depth in anything you do. So you're looking for all of the intangible things that's going on that manifests somebody's awareness in life. That's a big part of psychology. And there's quite a few other things. But for this video, we're going to be taking a look at suicide. I want to go ahead and we'll move this to back to August 11th. August 11th, 2014. So I gotta... Oops, don't want to do that. Keep pushing the wrong button. That's the year. Month, August. Day 11th. And here we are. The transits, the sun is conjunct his Pluto, 19 degrees, 18 degrees. Mercury is conjunct his natal Mercury. That really intensified all of those thoughts. He was diagnosed with, what is it here? Well, actually, they misdiagnosed him. They misdiagnosed him with a different dementia, but what he really had was Lewy body dementia, and I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but but something else was wrong. When I was reading the article about it, he was dealing with things that just didn't seem right. The dementia, he wasn't diagnosed with Lewy body at that time. He was experienced depression and a whole list of other things. Now, we know Robin Williams, and it's public information, you know. He struggled with addictions. He overcame those addictions. And it mentioned in there he had some other challenges with mental illnesses over the years, which, once again, this is that Pluto-Mercury thing. It's very difficult. When you do natal readings, when you're looking at people's natal charts, you better look real hard at anything to do with afflicted Pluto, because that is a real challenging area in an individual's chart, and especially if it connects with the mind, the moon, or the sun. So Mercury, the sun, or the moon, excuse me, all right? That will just amplify that experience in their life. That isn't the only thing that happened here. Around this time, we have, you'll see Mars. Mars is trining this, okay? It's conjunct his ascendant. So Mars is really powerful at this point. And other things here. So we have the nodes. The nodes in nice aspect to Mercury here. And, you know, and this stuff. And what that will tell you is you think, oh, well, Venus is up here touching the sun, things of that nature. Moon is down here. So we could, the moon, well, see, we got to be a little bit careful of the moon. The moon's pretty quick moving, but we have Neptune. Neptune's down here. It's making aspect almost. I can't really say that, because that's at 6 degrees. This is 9 degrees, 10 degrees, and they're transits. Natal chart, you give them a lot wider orb. I wouldn't push that. Uranus right here, 16 degrees, and here's his Neptune, 16 degrees. That is a powerful position. So there's a lot that just fell into play at that moment of time. Now, you would think with these nice aspects that it would relieve the situation. That isn't necessarily the case. What it can do is all these other aspects are in, you're struggling, but it gives you enough of a sense of calmness to actually kill yourself. To do the actual act, to get to that point, a lot of things have to fall into place for a person to finally either pull the trigger or take the pills. And those are the two primary suicidal attempts, methods of suicide, is they're not only, but they are frequently the ones people use, is pills or a gun. Now, it is not a rule of thumb that guys, and only guys use guns, because that is untrue. But frequently a guy will use a gun, and frequently women will use pills. But women will shoot themselves also. I read somewhere, so I know this. More men commit suicide than women, because men use a more lethal means to commit suicide. I read somewhere that women attempt suicide more than men. They just don't actually get the job done using the methods that they use. That I'm careful of saying that, because I read it somewhere just in the last couple of days, and I should have noted it so I could reference it, but I didn't. But in my experience, you know, I'm going to be pulling up a couple of charts here, and in my experience, I've got to agree with that to a certain extent, because most of them were females, and I don't know as many males. I'm going to do this real quick. Well, no, I'm not. I won't do that yet, but as far as the female to male ratio goes, in my own experience, I do know more females that attempted it. Okay, what we're going to do now is I'm going to pull up there are, okay, let's see here. This is a borderline here. I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity to be around a borderline personality disorder, and I shouldn't say an opportunity, I don't know how other to put it, but it is, I've met 3 of them in my lifetime. 3 that I know for a fact were full-blown borderlines. And they are, it's, when you're around people and they have mental disorders, you just know something's not right. You don't feel right. There's just something out of place. And there's a book out for borderlines if you have a borderline personality disorder that you're around. and it's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. You gotta read that thing. If you have borderlines, if you have brothers, sisters, if you're a parent, read that book. It is going to help you to be okay with yourself living under those conditions. But this borderline, I met this person when she was 14, I believe. And she, at that time, I didn't actually meet her at that time. It's when I ended up being aware of her. And she ran away. She was 14 years old, ran away. No apparent reason. I mean, there was no abuse going on in her home, nothing like that. She just ran away with her friends, went off on a journey, and they, ultimately, so there were some things that happened to her on that trip that were really bad. I'm not going to get into that. But she had drug addiction, alcoholism, plus the borderline personality disorder. And what you need to comprehend, and clearly comprehend this, you can have drug addiction, and that's all. You can have alcoholism, and that's all. You can have mental illnesses, and that's all. But when you have all three, things get really difficult for that individual. In her case, we have Pluto right here, 13 degrees Libra. And it's coming down here and it's squaring her Sun and her Jupiter. It's in Cancer. She ended up having an eating disorder in her life. And her moon up here is conjunct the North Node in the 8th house. Once again, 8th house stuff has a lot to do with psychology. It's pretty intense. There's a lot of depth to it. It relates to a certain extent to astrology because you're looking into, for lack of better terminology, energy that exists that you cannot gauge. You can't pull out a gauge and say, oh yeah, we have so much humidity in the air. Or you can't pull out a sniffer and say, oh yeah, we've got this much oxygen, this much carbon. You cannot, there's not a way to measure it except through astrology. And unfortunately, science is very disassociated itself with astrology. They say really bad things about us, science does. And this tool here demonstrates that there's something at work that we just don't know how to gauge yet. You can't see there's things you cannot see with your eyes, but we can use certain type of telescopes that will give us the ability to see things in outer space. And it's fascinating. And it's the same thing that's going on here. We just don't know how to gauge it yet. And in her chart, we have Pluto squaring this in Cancer, the Sun in Cancer. And she was anorexic. I heard the story, and I think she was, I want to say around 10 and 11. She was a full-blown anorexic at that time. Her life was filled with attempts of suicide. And she would try it frequently. And she almost completed it. And you didn't know she was doing it until after the fact. And that's a big problem when you're dealing with people with the ones that say nothing about it. And my experience is most of these people don't say anything about it. They're thinking about it. It's called suicidal behavioral disorder. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about when you get suicidal because you're going through a huge experience in your life. That is not what these people are experiencing. They wake up thinking about suicide. They go to sleep thinking about suicide. It fluctuates, goes up and down. It's not there as intense all the time. They are constantly planning. When the opportunity shows, oh, there's a bottle of pills. I'm going to take those because I can go put them and hide them in my dresser somewhere and start stockpiling pills for when I'm going to commit suicide. This is what's going on. That's really happening to these people. This is their experience here. So when we looked at Robin Williams' chart, we've seen the transits come through. They hit his Pluto up there, and that's when he finally committed suicide. And my question, which we do not have an answer for, is how much suicide did he think of over in his life, in his life? Because when I look at his chart, I'm thinking he probably, and he dealt with, he suffered from addictions in the early 2000s, things like that, and a little bit before that. I just, there's questions, but we can't get the answers to a lot of these because these people are not going to share that information. And once they're dead, we don't have much to go on other than family members. It even mentioned in the article that I read, his wife there was no problem. Seemed content that night before. She even thought he seems to be getting a little better. So it was not obvious at all. And you need to understand that. You will not know it. You will be in the same house with that individual and you will not know it, that it's going on. The man that, with the real CSI, his friend said, no, I was just playing golf with him. I believe like the day before, he seemed happy. Everything was going on. Fascinating. That's fascinating. So, I wish there was a way to be, astrology is our tool. This is what we have. This is what we have. Ultimately, with the drug addiction, the alcoholism, now, what we were told was she would one day quit attempting suicide as much. Because, and I'm paraphrasing it, but this is basically what the psychiatrist said. He said, because she will think that her miserable existence is the norm. And she'll start to be okay with that. And it was like after, I believe he said later on in her 30s. And it was about 30 when that happened. She didn't attempt suicide as much. It wasn't as common. She died at 42 years old. It was tragic. To watch her life unfold, she was with the drug addiction, the alcoholism, the mental illness. She was preyed upon. These people are preyed upon, and like all the predators, you have the drug dealers out there that prey upon these people, whether they be male or female does not matter. Once they get these people, they'll trade them drugs for sex. Biggest thing they'll do. The drug dealers are going to trade, and then once they destroy these people, then they won't have much, if anything, to do with them. Other than get money from them for their addictions. They end up living on the streets. She ended up living on the streets. She ended up in prison a couple of times. And to be perfectly honest with you, I kid you not, there was a disconnect in her life because of events that had happened and my disagreements with some of the drug dealers on the streets and things of that nature, that you need to understand when these people go towards their drug dealer, it isn't for any other reason than that's where they're getting their drugs. And so on and so forth about that. But the suffering that she experienced, it was horrific. She went to prison because she ended up macing a police officer. They showed up there for some kind of disturbance, and when she would freak out, man. It was crazy. It was unbelievable to experience this. You have to see it. Well, you don't have to, and God willing, you never will. But the cop showed up. She ended up, which was a felony, so they put her in prison for that. And to be perfectly honest with you, as crazy as this may sound, I was so thankful for it because she was finally in a place where at least she was going to get fed. She would It would minimize the violence towards her rather than living on the streets. And it's really difficult to see that happen to a human being that you know. Extremely difficult. And watch that evolve. And it pushes you, and I know another fella here, he works with CASA. And so CASA is an organization, and they do one thing. They protect children. They protect children. So they are the eyes and ears for a court. So if there's ever a CPS case opened up, they do not work for CPS. They do not do that. They do not work for anyone. They go out and investigate that child's life, and they report back to the court their findings. And interestingly enough, they are frequently at odds with CPS. But this fella said this to me. He said, he's looking for a solution. He sees all this suffering going on, and he's looking for a solution. And there is a solution, you guys. There is. And if we were a more evolved species, we would find that solution. But we're just not there yet. It could be another, if we make it, in order for us to evolve to this extent to where we would see this human being as a person we're saving, we would go to no end to do that until the mission was accomplished. This person here, we ended up, and me and my daughter, we ended up taking her to an emergency room, and that was to get her cleared to go into a treatment center, and she ended up losing it in there in the hospital, and they put her in an institution here we call Warm Springs in Montana, and she was in there for 5 days. When she came out of there, she was completely lucid. It was the first time ever in her life, well, anyway, for many, many years, that I ever remembered her being that clear. Her drug dealer walked up to her. I watched it happen. They went out, took a ride around, came back about 20 minutes later. She was high, and she never, ever again in her life experienced being lucid. This individual here was phenomenal. Phenomenal human being. It was just sad. I've never met a more sensitive, kind, the experience with this individual when she was sober. It's unexplainable. Now, I'm going to do this one, this next chart here. This next chart is somebody who has a suicidal behavioral disorder, and theirs is Pluto here, and their Pluto squares the sun, and their Pluto squares the moon. So, I'm going to be very careful how I say this, because there's no way you can be a perfect parent. There's no way you're going to know when you have children a lot of things that are going to unfold in your life that you have yet to learn. So her parents are here, the moon squaring the sun. Whenever you see that in and of itself, you can work with that. You can deal with that, okay? That's workable. But then you throw Pluto into it here, and this is called a T-square. I am introducing you to a T-square. That is when one planet squares another, which puts that into an opposition. So it looks like this. T-squares are quite a project in anybody's life. But there could be far worse aspects. If you believe it or not, these here actually will come out with a positive resolve most of the time. You will learn an experience from these that creates a deeper understanding, give you greater insight, into your life purpose. However, that being said, it's not a fun way of doing things. Pluto, right here. Whenever you see Pluto touching the moon in and of itself, that means they have a very intense emotional nature, and it's deep felt. We can all say we have deep feelings, things of that nature. Yeah, whatever you're feeling, put that baby on steroids, man. About 100 times amplified. Pluto in opposition to the moon, okay? The one way you can start to grasp the suffering of these other people is we all have minor aspects. So you can recall that, or when you're going through something, note that and go, oh, okay. And then it gives you the ability to start to have some empathy in your life towards these other people, because that is what will open you up to being a better person. Once you understand this stuff, you look at life differently. When I go through the streets here in my city, and there are a lot of people over the years that I sat down with, and due to some work I was doing, I know their life stories, and I see them on these streets homeless. I know what's going on there, so be very careful of the people you judge that are less fortunate than you. And be thankful for your position in life if that's not where you're at. And for you who are listening that are suffering, or your children are, there are ways of dealing with these things. Pick up and find out what their natal chart is. If you have children that are suffering, get their natal chart. Because now we need to get into some solutions. Oh, this individual here, this is just, I'm going to be careful of covering this one a little bit at this point, but you get the gist of it with the other stuff we did. Okay. I want some solutions here. And believe me, we haven't even scratched the surface here of the suicide stuff. We're running out of time. We're just running out of time in this video. And mental disorders, things like that. People, this is the power of astrology right here. Especially for parents who are struggling with children from whatever it is you're struggling with. Learn this discipline. Pull up that chart. You need their minute of birth. Place, minute, and date of birth. Get it. Find out what this ascending sign is, because this is part of the solution that you need to help that child and that or that person that you know are because one of the greatest tools that will help pull that person from that state of when those transits go through, like in this individual, when the transits, let's just pull up a transit of today. Okay. When these transits go through, like the moon, okay, the moon's up here right now. It's at 20 degrees. Well, it's going to become conjunct here. And when that happens, it lights that whole aspect up, that T-square that lights up. It'll be all lit up. It's going to be a heightened time of feeling pretty deeply. Pretty powerful tool to have, because you're not going to know it otherwise. They're not going to sit there and tell you about it. Some do. Therapy is essential. If you have somebody who has committed suicide one time, in our state we have, for children, we have it set up to where you can get that child therapy. And in the city I live in, we have Shodair's Children's Hospital. So we're really fortunate. A lot of you are not going to have that. And so you need to work with therapists. You've got to have a good therapist. You have to have a therapist that connects with that child. And you need to understand therapists aren't going to have all the answers. Don't bombard them with shit when you go through crisis. What you need to do with that child is you've got to spend time with that child. That is it's tedious, it's stressful, and it's just, but you guys, if you're a parent and you have children that are struggling, the best possible thing you can do that is going to make a difference in that child's life is spending that time with the child. Going through that process with them, listening to them. You've got to listen to them, no matter what. You gotta have patience. You've got to have compassion. And keep in mind, they never taught us this in school, but when you have children, that is your life. That is your life. They didn't teach you that, but keep that in mind. And there are programs, God, I wish I should have looked this up before I did this video, that help parents with how to, their parenting classes. And there's a woman here by the name of Jill. I don't want to give her last name, but she's phenomenal with it. And then there's a guy here who teaches those classes, and they teach parents how to make this connection with their children. And I don't care how good of a parent you think you are, get over that crap right now. These people are worth connecting with, because what they will teach you will enhance any of your parenting skills considerably, which is weird. People say, I don't need a parenting class. Well, if you're making that comment, you might want to re-examine your perspective a little bit, because I agree. I'm there sometimes too. I don't need any more information from other people. Are you crazy? I'll figure this out myself. That is what we do. Now, getting back to the chart, but that's essential. The therapy thing is essential. Some of them will need psychiatrists, and there are times psychiatrists can be extremely helpful, but you have to make the connection. You have to find the right people. We ended up with one individual with one of the best psychiatrists I had ever met, and it was at Shodair's Children's Hospital, and then she moved away. But the work she did with the individual, she worked with her maybe, I want to say 6 months, was just spot on. And there's some are better than others, but if the psychiatrist doesn't like you as a parent, and if the child tells you, I really didn't like that person, listen to it, because you've got to establish a relationship. Therapy relationships are established best over a long period of time. One individual I know sticks with the therapist, and that therapist deals with a few people that are involved in our family. And that's great, because then that therapist gets more information, has greater insight to the totality of things. Now, where we run into difficulties, if you're dealing with people with a lot of criminal activity in their family, a lot of drug addiction, a lot of alcoholism, they want to hide it. So that's a whole different ballgame. You have to put your children before anything. This is really, this day here, I'm looking at this now. Her sun is squaring her Pluto right now. It's going to last. Come on. She's going to experience that for about 3 days. So that's pretty intense time right there. And see, so I can look at it and I can say, okay, this would draw my concern. But this individual isn't any longer in my care, so I have to. But I probably will run into an individual that is very closely connected to that person today. All right. So, Pluto, Scorpio, in the 8th house, and Robin Williams had 8th house stuff here too. Is the 8th house. There's Uranian energy was in there. There's Mars in there too. And just because Mars in Cancer is extremely difficult, but Mars in the 8th house, Mars likes the 8th house. But remember when we did Donald Trump's chart, Mars is a malefic. And my daughter, she just took some classes from Liz Green, and she told me some interesting things about Mars. Out of all of these, all of the mythological characters, male mythological characters, Mars, interestingly enough, is the only one that never raped anybody. And he's the warrior. He's Aries. But man, I love Aries people. I do. I was down at the, for reasons that were challenging, I was at the 5th Ranger Training Battalion. My son was stationed there. And that was in Dahlonega, Georgia. And I did natal charts of a lot of these guys there, and it was Aries. They were Aries and Sagittarius. That was interesting. But I looked at it, and Sagittarians love to travel. That would make sense. Join the army, you can travel, but they still had usually a connection of Aries in there too. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and hold up on this video from here. Thank you for watching.